behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Voices of Faith series, presented by the Kamini and Vindi Banga Family Trust. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our session today, Tales from the Quran and the Hadith, Rana Safvi, in conversation with Manimugdha S. Sharma. Though it is well known that Islamic faith derives from the Holy Quran and the Hadith, not many are familiar with the illustrative details told in the form of stories. Rana Safvi's book is crafted for the modern reader who gets an insight into the Quran and the Hadith. Themes span the political subjects of warfare and violence, and also the humane encounters of faith and compassion. While the religious context of monotheism and the greatness of Allah framed the episode, the tone is one of a storyteller engaging with topics of universal appeal. Safvi's selection breaks through several assumptions about Islamic practice, including those regarding the place of women in history and in society. Manimugdha S. Sharma is a journalist with the Times of India and the author of Allahu Akbar. Safvi will be speaking to Sharma about how stories can be a path to mutual understanding of cultural identities. Rana Safvi is a passionate believer in India's Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, its syncretic culture, which he documents through her writings, podcasts, and videos. In 2011, she started the Twitter forum A Shair, which was responsible for popularizing Urdu online. She has published 7 books on culture, history, and monuments of India. These are tales from the Quran and the Hadith, the Delhi trilogy, Where Stones Speak, the Forgotten Cities of Delhi and Shahjahanabad, the Living City of Old Delhi. Manimugdha S. Sharma is a Delhi-based journalist with the Times of India and is the author of Allahu Akbar, Understanding the Great Mughal in Today's India, a non-fiction title that looks at the life and times of Emperor Akbar from a modern perspective. Sharma is also an avid quizzer and is fascinated by history and politics. All the sessions that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, including the Voices of Faith series. Please do remember to ask questions and comment by typing them into the comment section below, and we will send these to our speakers today. Ladies and gentlemen, Tales from the Quran and Hadith, Rana Safvi in conversation with Manimugdha S. Sharma. Rana, Mani, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. And thank you very much, JLF, for organizing this session. And it's my pleasure and privilege to have this conversation with one of my favorite people, Rana Safvi, who's a historian, an author, and a translator. So I'll just cut to the chase, Rana ma'am. I'll just ask you the first question. When it comes to Islam, and I do have some understanding of it, having been a student of history, but you bring a whole new perspective into it, which is it may have been familiar to some of us, but to the larger audience, it is not. So, and you curiously name your book Tales from the Quran and Hadith. So whenever Islam is talked about or the Quran and the Hadith are being talked about, it's always the theological side of it, which is more familiar to people, I think. But you bring a very humane angle to it. So my first question would be, why did you name it Tales from the Quran and Hadith and not something else?
Thank you so much, Mani, for being here. And thank you, JLF, for inviting me to this session on Voice of Faith. And I have written this book, let me clarify that to start with. I have written it as a believing Muslim. I am not an Islamic scholar. I am not a scholar of religion, but I am deeply spiritual and in a way religious. So I speak from that point of view, and I have written that book from that space. And to come to your question on why it is called Tales from Quran and Hadith, there is a verse in the Quran, in Surah Yusuf, which says, "We narrate to you the best of stories." Quran has come as it's a divine book, it's a revelation. It has come as a guidance for mankind, for humankind, and it has come for all times and all places. It transcends time and space. Now, the best way of giving a message of guiding people is always stories, and 1/3 of the Quran is based on stories. And these stories, you see, stories is something we hear as children. Even in our mother's lap, we grew up hearing stories from our elders, from maybe reading books. And these stories are the best way of conveying a message. So that is why the Quran also uses stories and parables to convey messages. And the stories are so dramatic. They are full of dialogues. They are narrative, something which is very popular these days. We see that a lot of narrative non-fiction books are being written because that's the best way to communicate. And the Quran had this right in the beginning that this is the best way to communicate. And so it inspires, it guides you, it warns you, it gives you an ultimatum, it gives you all kinds of things. It describes what events of the past, it tells you of events in the future, and most of them through stories.
So were there any tales that really stunned you? I mean, when you, of course, being a practicing Muslim, you had a certain idea about your faith. And then when you started actually digging for this book, when you started digging out these tales, was there anything about them that really stunned you, that you didn't expect, probably, that this would be there, as part of the Quran or the Hadith book? So were there surprises for you? Pleasant ones, of course.
Most of these stories are something I have grown up, but when I was researching them, then as you said, there's so many aspects which come out which one is not aware of. And one of the major aspects that for me, which was a revelation, was one is the story of creation, where Adam and Eve, the creation of Adam. And most people do not realize that Satan, or Iblis as he is called, or Shaitan as he is called in the Quran, I refer to him as Iblis and Shaitan. He was not an angel, he was a jinn. And when I told the story of the first story, the creation of man, I talked of God. He's creating this man out of clay, and I described the various kinds of clays that have come to make up this man. And then the angels are watching. The angels are made out of light, and they cannot disobey. They are only made to obey and to worship God. But jinns can obey or disobey, very much like man. And there is this one, his name is Azazil in the Quran, and he is watching. He is amongst the angels because of his devotion. He had reached that stage of piety where he could be among the angels, but he's not an angel. So he's filled with jealousy of this clay that God is making a form out of and giving so much of attention to. And then Allah says that, when he breathes his ruh into Adam and says that you prostrate. The angels prostrate, but Iblis refuses. He says, I am made of fire, I am superior, he is made of clay. And so for that, he's banished. And but he's given the boon that, he can continue to tempt man. And then another thing is that when Shaitan does manage to tempt Adam and Eve, he tempts them both. It's not one who is tempted. It's Adam and Eve, both who are tempted. And the transgression, the sin, the reward, the punishment, it's equal for both. So this was something which I really enjoyed researching and writing.
So this is very interesting, isn't it? Because the traditions that we have grown up listening to always blame the woman, right? Eve is often blamed for being tempted by Satan. So you're saying that in this case, they are both of them are equally tempted. So what does that say about equality, men and women, the position of men and women, at least in the Quranic sense? So what does that say?
In the Quran, the sawab or whatever the good that you will get for your good deeds, the punishment that you get, it's equal for man and women. It's not that, if a woman is saying her namaz, she gets half the sawab of what a man is doing. So the sawab and the azab, that is the punishment and the reward, they're both equal for man and women. So there is no this thing about that somebody will get that man has been put on a higher level, a woman has been put on a lower level. As I said, that even in the story of Eve, it is not she who is blamed. It is the fault is given for both. They are both at fault for transgressing and eating that from that tree. So that is the first to start with. And here I just like to, talk about one thing. And I'd in fact like to actually quote Amana Wadood, who has worked on Quran and gender. And in her book, Quran and Woman, rereading the sacred text from a woman's perspective, Amna Wadood writes on tafsir. Now, tafsir is the interpretation. The Quran came down. It was orally transmitted and then it was codified into a book. Now, the language that has been used is Arabic, but a lot of the words that I used have multiple meanings. And so that opens itself to interpretations. What we read are the interpretations. Now, on that, Amna Wadood has written, what concerns me most about traditional tafsir is that they were exclusively written by men, by males. This means that men and men's experiences were included, and women's experiences were either excluded or interpreted through the male vision, perspective, desire, or need of woman. So when we forget that the role of Khadija in the Prophet's, his prophethood, in his mission, it is she who supports him. It is she who is the first to convert.
Right.
And there are, of course, many other stories of women, which I have included in my book and which we'll talk about later. But this is to answer your first question.
Sure. I'm tempted to ask you this question because, a lot of the questions also arise from the environment that we live in. And, there seems to be this image that, equality of women is not there and it's not talked about very often. So as a practicing Muslim or a Muslimah, have you ever felt limited by your faith?
No, I have not. And I have, there are so much of conversation, of women not being allowed in mosques. Of course, what I do at home, has never been any conversation on what you can or cannot do at home. But let's talk of outside. Let's talk of going to mosques. I have been and I have prayed in almost every mosque, in not only in India, but also in the Middle East and in the USA. And I have never been stopped. In fact, I went to a small village near Jaunpur where there's a historic 13th century mosque. And I went there, and the imam over there was a very old gentleman whom you would think of would be very, conservative in his thinking.
Right.
And I asked him for permission and I said, can I pray here? And I said, Bibi, this is God's house. If you don't pray here, what else will you do? So, that is the kind of people I have come across. I have done my Hajj, and even there I have prayed in all the places where you were supposed to pray, behind the Maqam Ibrahim. I have prayed inside that semicircular oval where Hajra is buried. Now let's talk of, when you talk of women, Hajra, as you know, is the mother of Ismail and the wife of Abraham. And she is the one, when we do our Hajj, the biggest honor that we do is for her. When we do the Sa'i, 7 times we run up and down the hills, Safa and Marwa, to honor her and her quest for water. And the Zamzam, which is today considered Abe Hayat, or the water of life, came out because the child started beating his feet, and the water sprang up, and she said, Zamzam, Zamzam, stop, stop, which is why the name became Zamzam. And she is buried just next to the wall of the Quran. Now, she is not only a woman, she is a slave, and she is a Nubian slave. So think of the number of stereotypes. And I have prayed there also, because I used to live in Saudi Arabia. So then when we went, we have gone in times when there were very little crowds there. So I have prayed in that area as well. So I have been lucky that way. And if you have a strong faith, I don't think anybody can stop you, and nobody has the right to stop you, because as the Quran says, everybody has the agency over the religion. As long as you're a believing man or a woman, you are the same in the eyes of God.
Right. You're going through your stories. I mean, of course, I have, like I said, I have some understanding of Islam from a historical point of view, of course, being a student of history. You are a historian yourself. So I have to ask you this, the historian's point of view. The stories that you have documented are fascinating. It challenges so many stereotypes, and it opens up so many new vistas. So do you think, I mean, as a historian, and you must have seen the discourse that has been shaping up over the years, do you think that over the years, stances have hardened somewhat, and somehow the image of a rigid faith has emerged in more recent times than it was when it actually started off. Do you think there has been a bit of a contradiction there?
I think that is, universal. It has happened in every religion. It's not only Islam in which, positions have hardened. It's hardened across the board for all religions. And people are becoming more and more fundamental and more rigid instead of becoming spiritual. And, faith has a lot to do with spirituality also. It's not just religiosity.
Right.
But we are now, emphasizing the religiosity instead of the spirituality. So it's more about what you are seen as doing, not what you are doing yourself. There's one story in which I'd like to talk about because that's my favorite story from the Hadith. I created that story actually from a Hadith of the Prophet, where he talks of a woman who is a prostitute, and he says that she gave water to a dog, to a thirsty dog, and that she is, the reward for her is heaven. So just think of that, how many stereotypes that is breaking. And so here is a woman who is a prostitute. She's giving water to a Jew. Today, people would, condemn outright, not only, and I'm talking of Muslims, not only for the fact that she's a prostitute, but also for the fact that she's feeding a dog. Yet so much of emphasis has been given on being good. On, there's a hadith of the Prophet that even if you are doing wuzu or ablution in a running river, conserve water. So there is so much of lessons for us in the hadith, in the Quran. We have to take that. And, again, another thing which I keep emphasizing is that what is Islam and what Muslims do are two different things.
Right.
And so we should not confuse the two or conflate the two.
Right, absolutely. No, very important words, absolutely. And since you talked about this woman, who gives water to a dog, and the other story in your book of Yusuf and Zulekha, it comes to my mind. It's one of the fascinating stories, I must say. So, could you just take us through that? I mean, and how different were you stunned when you read the story? I mean, as a child, if you had read that story, as a grown-up, when you read that story again, was there any difference in your understanding of the same?
See, as a child, first of all, you're told the story of Yusuf because it's all about sibling jealousy. Right. And Yusuf is supposed to be an extremely handsome person. He's so handsome. Right. And there's such an element of drama in that story that when Zulekha tries to tempt him and, he resists and people come to know of it. So her friends start gossiping. And so she calls a lot of her friends to her house, gives them a knife and a fruit. She gives them a plate of fruit and a knife, and they're cutting the fruit, and then she calls Yusuf to come inside, and almost all the women cut their fingers because they're so mesmerized by his looks. So that's such a dramatic way to tell a story, and that story tells us about jealousy, it tells about passion, it tells you about rivalry, it tells you about piety, and Yusuf's strong belief in God. He does not at any point of time despair. And this story has been taken into Sufism as Ishq-e Haqiqi, which of course is open to interpretation because that is the Sufi point of view, where they are looking for the divine love. But so that story, and to contrast that, where Zulekha is shown as somebody passionate who is trying to, break rules, and you have the story of the Queen of Sheba. Right. A woman who is so wise. Her name is not given. In fact, the only name that is mentioned in the Quran of a woman is Maryam, the Virgin Mary, and Jesus is called Ibn Maryam. So she is the one who is the only one who is named. The rest are like Zulekha is named by her husband's name, and the rest of the women are referred to either as mothers or wives or whatever. But she is, and there's a surah devoted to her. So in the Queen of Sheba, or of Saba as it is called, which is modern day Yemen, you get to know of a woman who is so wise. She's the ruler of a very, very prosperous country. And when Solomon comes to know of it through his the hudud, the bird, and he decides that he wants that throne of hers, which is so magical, and he gets it, and then he sends her a letter that you convert, and she calls a council of her chiefs. They come and they counsel her that, let's go to war. And she says, no, war always brings discord and, unhappiness for the people in its wake. So let us not go to war. So see the wisdom of this queen.
Right. Absolutely.
These are the two women that I have, like I found contrasted, and both such real women, both women with which we can identify and from whom we can learn.
Hmm. In fact, in Rasulullah's own life, as you mentioned earlier on, Khadija is very central to the Islamic faith, being the wife of the Prophet and the first to convert, really. So, do you see that that understanding has remained even today? So, when you have grown up hearing all kinds of stories, do you think that that centrality of Khadija still remains? Of course, in normal conversations, we don't seem to hear that. And since I don't come from a Muslim household, so I'm asking you this as a layman, as a layperson. So that centrality of Khadija to Islam, is that something which is talked about in families today?
It is talked about in families, but at least in our family, that has been talked about, because she has been a role model for all of us. She was a successful woman. She was 15 years his elder. She was his employee. She was the employee of the Prophet, actually. And
Right.
when she found him to be very trustworthy and she liked him and she sends him a proposal, she's already a widow and she is one of the most successful business people of Mecca. And
Hmm.
she gets married to him. She, after that, you know, serves Islam, and her money is used for the early propagation of Islam, is all from her money. And the Prophet keeps, he always remembers her and he grieves for her after she dies, because she died before the Hijrat. And he keeps talking of her. And in fact, there are references that whenever he would get anything very special cooked, he would send parts to her friends in remembrance of her. So he always loved her a lot. And when he has his revelation, he during the month of Ramzan, when the Quran is revealed to him, he goes to the Ghar-e Hira, which is the cave of Hira, where he used to go on retreats. He goes there, and Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, appears to him and says, "Iqra," and keeps on repeating. And the first verse of the Quran is revealed to him, which is the Surah Iqra. He comes running down because he is scared that he's become Majnu or Jununi, that some kind of insanity. And he comes to her and she comforts him and she says, "You have always been so devoted to God and such a pious man. Why would God test you like this?" So that
Hmm.
is the story which I have included in my book, where in the night of Pa, the role that she played in comforting him, the role that she played in Islam itself, by not only believing in him and converting, but also in comforting him. And she covers him with a blanket and says that, and so throughout, and then she takes him to a cousin of hers. These stories I have described, where he says, "Yes, you are the uh, uh, prophet that has been prophesied in the book as the unlettered prophet who will come." So these are the ways in which the women, and his youngest wife, even Aisha, she has been a major transmitter of hadith. A lot
Hmm.
of hadiths have come from her. So it's not another wife, Hafsa. Again, she is the one played a very important role in the codification of the Quran. So it's not
Hmm.
that women have not played a role; they played a lot of role. But again, it's just that, as Amna Waduda said, the interpretation is from by males, and it's
Right.
at the time I think the women started writing.
Absolutely. No, I mean you are also a Shia, so Zainab is so central to the Shia tradition as well, right? So it cannot have no Muharram can happen without a name mention of Zainab. So absolutely, and I completely agree. So that interpretation, tafsir, and I do see that there's a lot of social media clamor which happens the moment something is talked about the faith, and then there are different interpretations. In fact, it's very difficult to pick up whose tafsir will you follow, isn't it? So how do you reconcile that? So there can be so many different interpretations. Which is the right way to go about it, and how have these stories helped you in doing that?
See, when I was writing these stories, I relied on the translation by Abdullah Yusuf Ali and the tafsir of Ibn Kasir. And
Mhm.
Ibn Kasir himself has written these stories. He has written a lot of stories from which I relied upon and from which I took. Of course, I did a lot of research apart from that, but his stories were the first I went to. Then there are many books which are written on hadith as well as on the Quran. A very good book on when I was writing on hadith, I read a lot of books on the Prophet himself. There's one book called The Nectar of Faith, which is published from Saudi Arabia itself. There was a competition in which this Indian man, I'm forgetting his name, sorry at the moment, but he won that. Then, of course, Leslie Hazelton and Karen Armstrong, and there are many other scholars who I read. And so when you're reading, see, you have to also see when you're reading that it is authentic, and the hadith has to be the Sahih, either Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim.
Right.
These are the only two hadiths I have relied upon. And tafsir, as I said, I took from Ibn Kasir for this book. Otherwise, I have read, there is the study Quran is there by Sayyid Hussain Nasr. So I have been reading that.
So there seems to be, I mean, when it comes to interpretation, that there is something, there's a general belief that, everything is fixed, nothing can change among non-Muslims, of course, when they view Islam. And so, when Muslim families understand this, of course, because, the same conditions don't apply in, say, Norway or in India, right? So when you're observing Ramzan fast, so obviously there'll be some differences in how you do it in a country like Norway or here in India. So how do we disseminate this, and how do we find a common ground through which, I mean, of course, your book is one of the ways, but how else do you think we could do this, bust these stereotypes?
See, as far as the fact is concerned that, the Quran is rigid, the tafsir is rigid, and you cannot, change anything in it. Now, for Ramzan, the word is given that when you're fasting, you have to continue your fast till you can you cannot differentiate between the thread of night and evening and, day. But in Nordic countries where there is continuous sunlight or continuous night, depending on the time that Ramzan falls in, what does one do? So there you have now mujtahids and learned people who have given their, judgments that you follow the nearest country, which has daylight and sunlight, and you follow the timings from there. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Norway. She said that, her name is Faiza Zaidi. She said that, like for children, her daughter is now 9 and would be fasting. She said a fast is 22 hours. So it's not possible for a 9-year-old or somebody who's old or who's not well to fast for 22 hours. And the Quran very categorically says that we have not, religion is not supposed to be, or Islam is not supposed to become difficult for you. They have made it easy. They have brought ease into it. So she said that, they fast as long as they can, and then they make it up by doing the qaza rozas. And these are as per what the mujtahids have said. So it's not that I can start interpreting the Quran as per what I want to do, but I can go and appeal to a mujtahid, or I can appeal to somebody, an ulama, who knows and who has studied. And here it is important to go to somebody whose credentials you can verify.
So apart from this, what other story from your book would you recommend? I mean, of course, every story is fascinating, and it gives you so many different ideas, and it helps clarify so many other things as well. Which one would you recommend? Of course, we know the story of Zulekha and Yaqub. That's one of your favorite stories. You also mentioned the story of Zamzam, which would be the third story in that list?
I'll give you 2 more, because you see, when I was writing,
more the merrier, yeah.
So the book was commissioned. It was commissioned by Chiki Sarkar, who is the founder of Juggernaut, on which published this book. I was very new at that time, and I kept telling her, you see, I am not a scholar of Islam. I can't write this book. She said, you are a storyteller, and that's what I want. So when I wrote this, and as I said, I've written right in the book itself, I've written that I'm not a scholar of Islam. I'm not a religious scholar. I'm just a believer, and I'm writing it from that point of view. A story which I found, and that is something that came to me as a revelation. And Chiki's instructions were that don't make all the stories the same. There has to be a variety of stories to bring out the flavor of everything. So one of the stories that I have added is the Prophet abstains, which is where there is some trouble with his wives, and he decides to, he goes into the mashraba, he abstains for a month. Until then the wives, and then there's a Quranic ayat also which comes out, and then the wives realize that, the position that they hold, and it's not, jealousy is not something that behoves them. So that is a story I like. Another story I like a lot is, which I've written, is The Sword of Ali, which is about Hazrat Ali's chivalry, where he fights with the Pahalwan, it describes the battle of the Khandak, or the battle of the trench, and where he is fighting this giant of a man. And when that man says that, just give me a second. Amr bin Abdewud. So he's fighting him, and this man keeps coming in, challenging everybody that, who is there. And in those days, it was single warfare. You came and fought one-on-one, and he keeps challenging, and nobody is willing to come. And then when Ali goes, and the Prophet stops him, and he says, that the man in front of you is Amr ibn Wadud, and he says, I am Ali. And he goes and fights, and he is, of course, much smaller in size. The fact very well known that Hazrat Ali wasn't very tall, but he is one of the most chivalrous and the bravest persons. People make an example of, or he has become a metaphor for bravery and for chivalry, or Jawan Mardi as it is called. And he goes there, he fights, and at one point of time, he's able to, with his dexterity and his thinking powers, he's able to fell him down. And he's sitting on his chest and about to kill him when Amr spits at him. And he gets up and he doesn't kill him. And when later he's asked, he says, at that point of time when he spat in my eye, I would have killed him out of anger and for me, which is not what I was to do. If it is a battle, it's a battle for Islam. And if I had to kill him, I had to kill him in the name of Islam itself. And so later on, of course, then when he leaves him, Amr comes back to hit at him, and then he kills him. So, these are stories of chivalry. When we talk of that Islam, these chivalrous stories also have to be brought out. And another thing is that when Hazrat Ali becomes the fourth caliph, he appoints Malik Ashtar as the governor of Egypt. And that letter is very famous. It has been quoted in the United Nations also, and in which he says, you are either a brother in Islam, or you are a brother in faith, or you're a brother in humanity. And by brother here, it means brother, sister, whatever. So we are together either in faith or in humanity, and that is what Islam has taught me.
Right, absolutely. Of course, Hazrat Ali is such an iconic figure, isn't he? I mean, when he's invoked every time, Ya Ali is the most common thing, right? So even those of us who are familiar with Bollywood numbers, we know that some of the very popular songs have had Ya Ali or Ali, Hazrat Ali's name. Nobody could stand in front of his Zulfikar. That's what the tradition is. So now that we have come to pop culture references, so I want to ask you this question, and I personally this is a very personal question as well. So I think while growing up, I understood more stories about various religions than I do so now. And now we are just confined to, so there are no Muslim heroes anymore on our mass media channels. Presentations don't have that. So in that case, how difficult do you think it is to project this image of Islam, the true image of Islam, which is like every other faith? Everyone believes in that. I mean, families that follow the faith, people who follow the faith, they are just like the rest of us. And how do we create awareness, more awareness? Through your tales, of course, these are fascinating stories. How do we find more stories like that? How do we engage? So what would be your take on this?
So I'd like to go back to the subject on which you have written, Akbar. Now, when Akbar was ruling, as you know, you've written about it so eloquently, his Sulh-e-Kul, universal peace. And we also know that he got a lot of Hindu scriptures translated, not only Hindu scriptures, even the gospel. And the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, they were all translated into Persian. The gospel was also translated. And reason for getting these translations done was that it's only when there is no awareness of another person's religion that hatred comes up. When you know and understand each other's faith, you can find the similarity, and that hatred goes away. So I would say that each person has to be the best example of themselves as a follower or believer of a certain faith, and be that if you look at me and you say, okay, I'm not talking of just of me, this is a metaphorical, because who am I, but a metaphorical way of saying it, that you look at a certain person and think, okay, if he so and so is a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or whatever faith it is, that faith seems good. So first of all is that we be good representatives of the faith that we believe in, the religion that we follow, and also that we try and learn about each other's religion. Now, this is something that I grew up learning. My mother actually had done her master's in philosophy and specialized in philosophy of religions. So we grew up believing this, that there is a famous hadith that there are 125,000 prophets who were sent. And the Quran also mentioned that there is no region which we have left without a message. So we grew up believing that every region on earth was sent a prophet. So how can you ever, criticize anybody or any religion or any faith? Because every religion in some way or the other is, going to the same goal of that same divine, that same, being good, going on the good, leading a good life and following the path of virtue and piety. So we grew up with this, and I grew up knowing, of course, we went to convent, so Bible was something that we learned in school, but I am very conversant with all the scriptures, the Hindu scriptures, of course, my own, as well as the Bible. So you understand them, and that is where it's only when there is no understanding and you fear something that, God knows what is written in their books, that is when all kinds of misconceptions happen. And that's not only with religion, it's with every subject. In history also, we are seeing what is happening.
Right, absolutely. And since you talk about history, I mean, every day one historical character or the other, almost all of them Muslims trend on Twitter, or you've seen our social media timelines. So it's Aurangzeb tomorrow, today it's Babur, and tomorrow it could be Tipu Sultan. So since you have written this book, which character or which story from the Quran and the Hadith, or which of your characters that you have put together, would you want to trend on Twitter, let's say? A fun question.
One is, let's start it with K, the two Ks. One is Khadija and the other is Khwaja Khizr.
Okay.
The green man, and there's a story which I've written in the quest of Moses, where Moses is the most mentioned prophet in the Quran. So Moses, he feels that he knows everything, and God tells him, no, there's somebody who knows more than you, and he goes in search of Khwaja Khizr, and Khwaja Khizr allows him to come with him on the journey, provided he doesn't ask questions, but he keeps on questioning. And so eventually Khwaja Khizr says, no, you cannot come with me. So that, that quest of knowledge, it's a beautiful way of how anybody who's on a quest for knowledge the way that you should conduct yourself. So Khwaja Khizr is, and he's somebody I remember almost daily. He's said to be the patron saint of travelers. He's the patron saint of, whenever I go out of the house, or whenever I'm traveling or I'm thinking of traveling, I always, remember him. Khwaja Khizr, make this journey easy for me. And his wisdom, of course, is legendary. So when you are seeking wisdom, then of course you think of him.
So you have seen the series, and I am in fact a big fan of that. Ertugrul, it's a Turkish production, and a lot of people in India as well as Pakistan are picking it up. That. In fact, I have got so many, my daily speaking has been influenced by so many words that I have picked up from that series. So do you think that's a good way of, or could be one of the ways of projecting, or let's say disseminating information about the faith, about these traditions? Because the way they show Islam is very different from the stereotypes that we are used to, right? So do you think that could be a way, something like that?
Again, it's storytelling.
Absolutely.
Storytelling is the best way to project any message that you want to give, but the storytelling should be authentic. I haven't watched too much of Ertugrul. As you know, I've been having.
I think I have watched more than you.
I've been having for years. So TV is something which I have more or less, like given up on at the moment. So watched a few. And I love the character that they've shown of Ibn al-Arabi over there. And the way he is shown, his wisdom. And I would say that, what we need at the moment is the healing touch, compassion. Whenever God, as you know, God has 99, Allah has 99 attributes, sifat, or as they are called. And every sifat has, a parallel one. Like if we talk of his Jalal, which is majesty, we talk of Jamal, which is beauty. So that's a masculine and a feminine side. If we talk of Rahim, we talk of, his Ghazab. We talk of Qahr, we talk of his, Latif, Lutf, gentleness. So everything has been so well balanced in the Quran. Why do we, when we start anything, any Muslim, when we start anything, we started with Bismillah Rahman Rahim, which means in the name of God, the compassionate and the benevolent.
Merciful, yes.
We are going on emphasizing his Rahman, the attributes of Rahman and Rahim. Yet we keep talking of his wrath all the time.
Right.
For me, it is his Rahmat and his, the attribute of being Kareem, kind, Lutf. All these are things which we should be talking about, and trying to follow in our daily life as much as we can. So it's not just that we pray 5 times a day that is going to take us to heaven. It's also conduct. And ihsan is again something, ihsan and ikhlaq is something which has been, ihsan is the beauty of your acts. Ikhlaq is your conduct. That is something that has been given a lot of emphasis in Islam. And that is again something, as you had asked, how do we project ourselves? With correct ihsan, with our ikhlaq, we have to make sure that we are, we present the best face that we can.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you when you say that, fear is invoked all the time, that there'll be punishment and all that. So it seems as if like our gods have also become angrier the way we have become over the years, I think. So they've also been stressed out completely. So I don't know if you have time for one final question. I think we are pretty much within time. But this is, of course, I want to ask you this because you are also a historian and you have compiled stories. So what do stories mean to a historian? And do they complicate your understanding of the past or of the faith? Or do they add to it? And when you put something out like this, like stories from the Quran and the Hadith, how do you deal with the pressures, the demands that more orthodox elements can maybe sometimes put on you? So how do you reconcile all this? So a long, more complicated question for you at the end, but I think you can take that.
No, I deal with questions regarding my faith from my heart.
Absolutely.
Here I'm not a historian, I'm just a believer. And anything to do with my religion comes from my heart, comes from my belief, comes from my studies and whatever I have studied and whatever I have learned and imbibed. And again, I would urge people who are listening to us today that whatever religion you belong to, whatever your faith is, read. Because even the Quran starts, the first ayat of the Quran, the first verse of the Quran that came down, the first line that came down was Iqra, read. So, and we do read the Quran, but we read it in Arabic and sometimes don't. Obviously, most of us don't understand it. So read it to understand. And even the, the hadith is that the sawab is, or you get good points for if you understand what you're reading. So understand that, understand your own religion. Don't let people distract you. Don't let people tell you that this is what it says without, like, I remember somebody, when this book first came out, I was questioned by somebody who was a Muslim and he said, how dare you write stories? You are talking of the Quran and you talk of the word story. And as I quoted from you, that the Quran itself says that this is the best of stories. And the story of Yusuf is called the best story. And that the story, the whole Quran has been told in parables and stories. Of course, there are other instructions also, but not the whole Quran, but most of it, the use of parables and stories have been made in 1/3 of it. So it's because we are reading a language which we don't know. So we get, easily misled. So anything you hear which is controversial, anything which you hear which you feel maybe your heart is not agreeing to it, go and read about it. Talk to the ulemas, talk to to the religious scholars, and find out more about it. Today, everything is so accessible, and even the scholars and the ulemas and the mujtahids, everybody is accessible online.
Right, right. I think we have just run out of time. Thank you so much, Rana. It was lovely speaking with you, and we could just go on and on. You know that. But thank you very much for having this conversation with me, and I thank JLF, the organizers, for organizing this and for giving me this pleasure and the privilege of having this conversation. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you so much, Manimugdha Sharma. Thank you, Rana Safvi. That was absolutely fascinating to hear these quite incredible stories and stories of balance. And as you said, if you don't read, or if you only read to recite, how will you ever understand the text, not necessarily only of Quran, but across the religious pantheon that we celebrate in this country? So take a cue out of what Rana and Mani have said. Read your texts. If you don't understand, ask, debate, question, it's about the story. Beautiful stories that illustrate the syncretic traditions of the many different religions that we have. All the session conversation, but thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. And we hope you log back on Wednesday, the 9th of December, for the next set of our exciting sessions on JLF's Brave New World. Remember, Voices of Faith will continue every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Thank you. Stay safe, stay masked.